Hi everyone, my name is Depinder and most of you probably know me for my time in MasterChef Australia Season 13. MasterChef has been a life-changing experience for me, and today I will be taking you through my food journey and where it all began. It was the last call for our flight, time that I left behind, what I called home, and entered a foreign land, Australia. With our luggage, I carried memories that I held very close to my heart, and all I could think about was my summer holidays when we'd get served that little thali on the Rajdhani Express on our way to Baroda as we travelled to Gujarat every single year to see my maternal grandparents, especially my Nani, who is now one of my biggest cooking inspirations. We never returned from Baroda empty-handed. Instead, we had these massive jars and containers of homemade chunda, mango pickles, theplas, like lots of them, and basically, every Gujarati farsan that you can think of. I have tried multiple times and I'm yet to make the chunda that tastes exactly like the one my Nani used to make. I guess these are the phases of life and things that you can never forget. And for me, it's these tasteful memories that I experienced as a child. So yes, with memories of summer holidays and Gujarat, we set on a new trip, a forever one to Australia. Being my first international trip outside of India, I remember the energy I had running through my 11-year-old self, looking forward to seeing this new world. I still remember when my Dadaji came to drop us off at the airport terminal with chai, snacks, love and blessings as we embarked on this new life as a family. And just like that, everything changed. My brother, who was only 7 at the time, and I were so fascinated by everything we saw in Australia. All we wanted to do was embrace this new world full of surprises. Having lived in India, especially in a big family, moving to Australia came with its own challenges, especially when it came to food. There was no chunda or theplas that we could relish, and home was just really far away. In India, we were spoiled for choice when it came to food, including a variety of street food, which was just at our doorstep. Something which was extremely hard to find in Australia, especially as new immigrants. Our closest option was McDonald's, and that too tasted so different to the one we had back home, and something always felt missing. Food for me was something that always offered me a sense of belonging, especially after we moved to Australia. I was extremely proud to have it as a part of my life. I carried my culture and my food to this new place I would grow to love and call my new home. And so ghar ka khana, or home food, became a refuge, the only piece of home I had with me, something that gave me warmth and comfort. My mum would make us parathas for lunch to take to school, and let me tell you, this wasn't the most popular meal in my new group of friends. It was like I couldn't fit into this new culture, and definitely not on my own terms. As I opened my lunchbox, they would either scrunch up their noses or scoff about, the difference in the smells that used to come out of my lunchbox, which I absolutely loved. So fitting into this new culture slowly started to, become my utmost priority at the time. To me, Indian cuisine has always been indescribable. It's not just taste, it's my grandmothers, my aunts, my mum, my memories from yesteryears. And as a child, I was like a sponge. I learnt and soaked up everything about food, even if it wasn't directed at me. One of my favorite mithais during festivals and in general has always been gujia, deep fried in ghee, stuffed with dry fruits and mava, soaked up in a sugary syrup. So aromatic, and even today, as I talk about it, I can polish an entire box alone. Our caretaker in India, Sheila Auntie, realised how much I loved eating this. And so she decided to teach me how to make it. We went shopping together for all the ingredients. She brought her mould from home. We sat on the floor for an entire afternoon, filling containers and containers with gujia. And this is probably one of the most special food memories that I have as a child. It became a tradition, and every year for Holi and Diwali, Sheila Auntie and I would sit down together and we'd make gujia for hours and hours. Every time I make gujia at home, even today, I can still feel the energy and that excitement that I had when I first made it. With one whiff of its sweet buttery aroma, I can remember Sheila Auntie. That afternoon floor, the warmth and the moulds just takes me home every single time. I always drew inspiration from my aunts and grandmothers when it came to trying my hand, at cooking as a kid. My dadi, for instance, taught me how to make this sabzi, which was like a stuffed capsicum with potatoes, and it was one of my favorite dishes to make. I found that it was easy, it was delicious, and everyone loved it. So in a nutshell, I can say that most Indian dishes I cook today, especially home food, owe some credit to the women in my life from back home. As I grew older, I started to call Australia my home. My culinary journey expanded towards baking and experimenting. In a way, I moved on from just cooking Indian food. As a young kid, I always saw my mum make birthday cakes in her old aluminium round oven. And something just clicked. Why don't I try my hand at baking? I started off baking very basic butter cakes and slowly began experimenting with unique flavors, with, new techniques. And soon I was baking cakes for almost every birthday in my family and friends circle. And they would use every occasion, as an excuse to get me to bake for them. As I reached university, I started to spend a lot of my time cooking for my friends, for example, baking banana bread and brownies, things that I loved to eat. When they came home for summer, it was gobi Manchurian and other IndoChinese dishes that they craved. And IndoChinese, is one of my absolute favorite cuisines to indulge in, especially when I travel to India. It's something so distinct and something that doesn't taste the same anywhere else. So I make it a point to stuff myself with enough Indo-Chinese food every single time I visit India. I still remember back in Delhi, eating out was a ritual for our family. We indulged in a lot of street food. However, when we moved to Australia, as a young migrant family, that touch of home was missing. Eating out as a family became less and less popular for us because the food we loved was all back in Delhi. So MasterChef Australia was the background music to my growing years in Australia. I watched every single season, took inspiration, and continued to cook my cuisine. I always thought it was going to be an eternal dream because I spent 3 long years contemplating, applying, filling out the application, but not having enough courage to submit it. When the pandemic happened, I got that push to try. It made me realize that there were only so many chances we get. And so I finally submitted my application with very little expectations. In fact, when I flew to Melbourne for my auditions, I told my managers I'd be back, in a couple of weeks because I didn't even think I would, get onto the top 24. But I managed to get myself a white apron. And when we were challenged, I found myself reminiscing about home and food. I particularly recall a 3-step elimination where I decided to make one of my dad's favorite go-to dishes. I watched him make at home in the evenings, and I used to remember eating it in the narrow streets of Amritsar. So when the challenge was announced, I cooked what I knew, fish Amritsari, just like I have seen and eaten it for all these years. Indian food representation in Australia has been limited. So I undertook that journey to portray a varied culture and rich heritage using some of these dishes that played a huge part in my childhood, and food that takes me back home with every single bite. Butter chicken is one such dish. Every time I cook it, I'm transported back to Delhi, to a restaurant named Moti Mahal, the home of butter chicken. Like, imagine eating something exactly how it was invented, having recollections of eating it with your family. So once I decided to make butter chicken for my friends Tommy and Linda from MasterChef during our filming days in Melbourne, and I remember their reactions. They absolutely loved it. It was a very special moment for all three of us, as we come from different places, different cultures and different homes. And that was a moment where we all shared the food that we grew up eating as children. Recognizing the diversity in India has become my main focus. As regional cuisine, every state, has its own region, its own food, its own specialty. This is something I've always tried to showcase through my cooking. My dream has always been to see Indian food as mainstream cuisine in Australian food industry. But beyond that, I would love for the general public to be able to recognize the differences in Indian regional cuisines. When we first moved to Australia about 20 years ago, Indian restaurants and takeaway was limited to about 4 or 5 curries, and they were all far from authentic when it comes to flavor, when it came to, the look of them. In the last 10 years, however, I have witnessed, Indian flavors take on that challenge, and Indian chefs making our regional food as well as street food more accessible and known all over Australia. A very important lesson that I learned from my time at MasterChef is that just because I'm familiar with my cuisine and it comes naturally to me, doesn't mean that it's less special. More times than one, the judges were amazed by how I could pack so much flavor into a dish in such limited amount of time. And I was reminded about that time when I made the biryani, which normally takes hours and hours to make. And it was still possible to pack it with so much flavor in an hour or so using different techniques. Someone like me, who has grown up watching her mum, grandmothers, aunts cook home food, I feel extremely privileged. And sometimes I do take it for granted. But to someone who's never been home, whether they're Indian or not, it's always going to be something special. We tend to pass off our home food, home food meals as everyday food, but to the Indian diaspora, this is the only part of their culture that they carry with them. Even though I moved away from Delhi a long time ago, it has always been the food that has brought back memories and helped me feel at home while cooking. It brings me great joy to be able to cook for my friends and my family, and this is my way of sharing my home with them. My cooking has built a strong connection for me for generations to come, like a bridge between my two homes. And I have come to realize that food really is the home for Indian diaspora. I would like to thank you all for listening to my food journey and how it all began. I hope I can inspire some of you to carry the food we make at home and the food that is nostalgic to us with pride wherever we go, and continue those traditions for generations to come.